The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Can see everybody coming into the session, so thank you for joining us this morning. Holly, good morning.
Morning, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Although I have to say it is almost May and I have got a hot water bottle, which I think should be illegal, but you know, we're making the most of it. I'm by the sea, I'm in Brighton, so it's always going to be a bit windy.
Yeah, fantastic. It's very, very cloudy here in Staffordshire today, but nice to be here. So thank you everyone for joining. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So just to let everybody know that the webinar today is being recorded. There should be a question box on your webinar toolbar, so please do interact with us throughout the session. And if for any reason you can't access the chat function or you have any follow-up questions, please do feel free to contact me and Holly throughout the session or send us some follow-up questions afterwards. Our email addresses are on the screen and we'll show them again at the end. If I can have the next slide, please. So you are being hosted today by myself. I'm Heather. I'm an account director here at Bailey & French, and I'm joined by my colleague Holly. Holly, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. It's nice to see everybody. You can see I'm a lead consultant, as you can see on the screen. But yeah, me and Heather work together very, very closely, and yeah, just both super excited to be here and chatting to you all today.
So I'll give a brief introduction to Bailey & French for those of you who don't know us. We are a small independent consultancy based down in Brighton, and we use positive psychology and the latest research to support organisations with well-being, leadership, team relationships and performance. Our main purpose is to humanise the world of work, and we're going to touch on that a little bit today. And we work with organisations across the private and public sector, including the civil service, in the UK and across the whole globe. Today we're going to be discussing human leadership, and we're going to talk about what is human leadership and why it's important. And we're going to ask a few questions in the webinar today, and do try and make it interactive. So as I mentioned, please do post any questions or thoughts that you might have through the session. Thank you. So can we have the next slide, please?
Fab. So I'm going to jump in here to get us started. So as Heather said, we want this to be a bit more interactive than maybe a typical webinar. We want to hear your thoughts, hear your ideas, and just find a bit more about what's going on for you as well. So we've got a quick activity to get us started. This is what we sort of call a positive starter activity, which we use in all of our workshops. So we wanted to give it a go here today as well. Also appreciating it's almost lunchtime. People are probably hungry, but we want to stay positive. We want to stay engaged throughout the session today. So we're going to use this question just to energize ourselves, get in a positive frame of mind, but also it's linked to what we're talking about today, which is ultimately leadership and the leaders that we work with and what a good leader looks like as well. So if you want to use the chat feed, if you can see that, or use the question box and you can send us a question to answer what we've got on the screen there. So thinking about a great leader that you've worked with or that you've heard about, think about why were they such a great leader, what did they do, how did they behave, how did they act, and share your thoughts with us. We want to see what you've experienced in leadership so far. When I think of my answer to this question and think about a great leader I've worked with, I think the best one that I can think of was actually a manager of mine. And the reason why I thought she was so fantastic was because she was just super honest with me. Super open, super transparent, sort of told me how it was able to, tell me what was really going on, why things were going on, and didn't hide, some of the bad stuff, as well as also sharing the good stuff with me. So that's why I thought she was such a great leader. Heather, do you have one that you can think of?
Yeah, I do actually. It was the chief operating officer at a previous job that I had, and he was just so wonderful at making time for people. He really took the time to kind of listen and really kind of reflect on things before reacting. I just really appreciated that for him. I never felt like I was taking up any of his time, and he was just really interested in me as a person as well. So that was lovely. Yeah.
No, that sounds good. I feel like that's super important, to feel like you're respected and you're valued for who you are as a person. So yeah, I can see why that was such a good leader. And you know, we're seeing similar things come through from other people on the session as well in the question bar. So someone that inspires us, someone that listens to us, I think is super important. We've got an answer here about role modeling a great healthy work ethic, which is something that's super important. Sort of, it always has been important, but even now more so than ever. Thinking about that, there's lots of workloads, work pressures, but being able to role model that from a leadership point of view is really important. You know, we've got knowledgeable, approachable, supportive. So it's lots about those, and I don't want to say soft skills because I think that can sometimes devalue what we're talking about, but rather than thinking about the technical skills of leaders that they have to do and their experience and their knowledge necessarily, actually a lot of this is about how they relate to those around them, how they treat you and how they value you. So again, other things like being motivational, being humble, putting the needs of those they manage above their own, feeling sort of that they're trusting the team and help to solve issues with you, and problem solve. So not blaming, but making sure that actually, you know, that they're supportive as well. So I think there's a lot there about what these great leaders look like. And it's also really nice to see that people have worked with such great leaders. There are people out there already doing really good things as we think about what human leadership means. So we're already starting from a pretty good place as well. So thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts. Feel free to keep sharing them if you want to, keep reflecting on that question. But we're going to move on now and start to think about a human leader more specifically. So the first point that we're covering today is, what is human leadership? So at Bailey and French here, we talk about human leadership a lot. This is sort of our approach to supporting leaders and managers. Sort of the terminology can sometimes be a little bit interchangeable, but thinking about what makes a human leader. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. We just wanted to share, first of all, some common myths about leadership before we start to think about what leadership is and what human leadership is. We want to think about what is it not. So we all have experiences of leadership, and we all have experiences with good leaders, hopefully, and sometimes we might have experience with leaders that are not so good, and we'll all have these preconceptions of what we think a leader should be. And on the slide, you'll see that there's several myths there about leadership, and to be honest, they're not necessarily all true. And actually, for the ones on the slide, I will go as far to say that none of them are true. So what we've got here, we've got leaders that all have to have the answers, and I'm hoping you can hear me. I see a couple of comments in the chat saying that people can't hear me, but I'm hoping that you can. Heather, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, Holly.
Fab. So we've got the first one here saying that leaders have to have all the answers, and actually we've really found that, you know, leaders don't have to have all the answers because they're working with a lot of people. They've got large teams, lots of different people in the organization that they can work with in collaboration with. And we do know that there's research that shows that leadership effectiveness actually comes from those who draw on the strengths and the knowledge of others as well, rather than forcing their specific idea on others or forcing their specific plans on others. So you can see it's a bit more about collaboration rather than leaders being the pinnacle of that. One of the other myths that we see is that leaders must be extroverts. This is one that resonates to me quite a lot because I am personally an introvert. And, you know, there's always a big discussion about extroverts versus introverts. And often we can see that people think leaders should be extroverts, be more outgoing, be louder. But actually, again, you know, there is research to suggest that introverted leaders are super effective as well. We know that they tend to take more time to think and reflect and be, you know, they can sometimes be a bit more measured in their approach. So actually they can be super effective leaders as well. They don't just have to be extroverted. We've also got vulnerability on here as well, which, to be honest, we could spend a whole hour just talking about vulnerability and leaders alone, and we don't have all of that time today. But some people think that leaders shouldn't show vulnerability or can't show vulnerability, but actually, and we'll talk about this more in terms of our approach to human leadership, but we do know that if leaders are vulnerable, and that's vulnerable to an extent, you know, we sometimes have to think about how much vulnerability we do want to demonstrate, but leaders that demonstrate some vulnerability open up that space for others around them to also be vulnerable and be more authentic. And it's that good role modeling piece there as well. And then finally, some other myths. We've got leaders must never fail, and we also got leaders must always be on. And that again is another myth about leadership as well. So we want people to care and look after their people. It's not all about those results. And, you know, leaders sometimes have to admit that they don't know everything, they can't do everything. So again, it's admitting their mistakes, treating these as learning opportunities, and appreciating we all have different strengths. It's something that we want to appreciate in others. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. Let's play to our strengths and play to the strengths of other people as leaders, and that's what can make a really effective leader. So these are some of the myths about leadership. As I've said, we don't believe these are necessarily true, and we do think that there is a better way of being a leader and demonstrating great leadership qualities. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. We've got a question here for you to think about, which is, what do you think human leadership means? And again, this is a question we'd like you to answer. So everybody on the session, again, using the question box or the chat feed if you can see that. But when we say human leadership, what do you think that means, or what do you think that looks like? And I'm just going to pause here just to give you a chance to reflect and share your answers for that one.
I always like asking this question. I always like seeing the variety in answers that come in.
I know, especially because we talk about it all the time. So I think it's really interesting to see what other people think about that before we say what we think, because we talk about it every day.
Absolutely. It's lovely to see that external perspective coming through.
So I can start to see some of the answers that are coming in. We've got a caring leader, human leadership being about being present, someone that's interested in the people around them. So, you know, asking questions, finding out more, being curious. We've also got personal leadership for each person, which I think is a really interesting point. It's not a one size fits all, you know, that we've all got different preferences, different styles. We've got, you know, different ways of doing things. And it's not the case of making everybody behave in exactly the same way. We do not want to do that. But yes, it's absolutely appreciating that we're all going to have slight differences, and it's tuning into that and embracing that as part of human leadership. So I think that's a really, really interesting point. Some of the other points that we've also got about human leadership, so we've got things about recognizing authentic human skills and qualities, being an active listener. Listening is actually a very, very common theme that's coming through in the answers to this, in terms of listening to others, active listening. I think that's something that's come up a lot. So it seems like it's super important as a leader. We've got psychological safety and building trust. Again, psychological safety is a super important concept at the moment. It's something that everybody is talking about quite a lot, but something that is important for exactly that reason. And being a human leader helps create that psychological safety in their teams. And finally, we've got understanding what makes people tick and being responsive to everyone's individuality. So again, you know, whilst we've said that leaders are all different and we'll all have different styles and our own personal differences, it's the same for the teams of those leaders as well, and for leaders to recognize that in themselves, but in others as well. So it's super interesting, and I know that not everybody can see all of these responses, but we'll be happy to share some of this after the session in terms of what other people have been sharing in response to these questions, so you can all learn from each other and see what other people are thinking and if it's similar to you as well. So we'll definitely be sharing these thoughts following the session and emailing them over to you. But if we can move on to the next slide, please. We're going to just go into a little bit about what we at Bailey & French think about when we talk about human leadership. And to be honest, I can't take all credit for this, because from all of your answers in the question box to the question that we've asked, I think you've pretty much covered all of it, to be honest. So round of applause, gold stars for everybody, because you've basically made my job easy in terms of going through what we mean by human leadership. But just so that we're all on the same page, really, we've got research that we've used to form our basis of what we mean by human leadership. So it's based on years of research into various different concepts, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there. We've got emotional intelligence here, so we're thinking about self-awareness, we're thinking about other awareness, self-management, other management, sort of those 4 key pillars that make up emotional intelligence based on Goleman's model. Those are all super important as a leader. It stands the test of time. Emotional intelligence is not a new concept, but it's one that's super effective and really well researched, which is why that is one of the bases that we've used in terms of what we think a human leader should be and should demonstrate. We've also got servant leadership up there. So someone has definitely already mentioned this. I've seen it in the chat, but this is all about putting the needs of the people first to help them develop and perform as highly as possible, rather than serving their own interests. As a leader, is thinking about what do other people need and sort of helping to serve that. And similarly to that, we've also got stewardship. So stewardship, again, is about operating in service rather than control. So we're not trying to control the people we manage and we lead. We've already discussed that everyone is different. We've got unique strengths, unique skills, unique attributes that we all bring. We don't want to control that. We want to service it and empower it. So that's another sort of research basis behind what we think about in terms of human leadership. We've got strengths-based leadership. Bailey and French is all about strengths. I love thinking about our strengths and, what strengths we have, what energizes us, what do we enjoy doing, and playing to those in work and outside of work. So again, as leaders, it's understanding your own strengths and how that impacts your leadership style, but what are the strengths of other people around you and how can you play to those? And then finally, authentic and inclusive leadership, terms and concepts that probably aren't surprising to anybody. Again, terms that we use frequently and we hear quite a lot when we're thinking about leaders, but being our true selves, thinking about our values, our beliefs, our principles, our morals, and using that as sort of a guiding compass, and also being aware of our biases as well, and making sure that we keep those in check, and we're making sure that we account for those to make sure that we're making good decisions and helping to consider different perspectives and different views as well. So that's a lot of research that we've looked at, lots of different concepts, all super important, none really more important than the other. And so what we've done is to make it super simple when we're talking about human leadership. We've said, what is the summary of all of that, of all the research that we've seen around leadership? What is the summary? What are the key principles that we want to work to and want to develop to be more human as a leader? And that's what we've got on the right-hand side. So we've got 4 core principles there that basically illustrate and combine all of that research. So we've got authenticity, we've got inclusivity, we've got role modeling, and we've got human connection as well. So in terms of authenticity, as I've said, you're aware of your own strengths, your own weaknesses, your purpose, and you demonstrate that, you live that, and you breathe that as a leader. Inclusivity, we're curious about other people, but without judging them. We're truly open-minded, we truly want to accept people and recognize their unique strengths as well. Role modeling, again, pretty self-explanatory in terms of we want to demonstrate inclusive behavior. We're open to challenge and feedback as well. So that's something that we see as really important as part of a human leader, is that always learning piece and allowing and empowering other people around us to challenge and question things, and ultimately being a good role model for both performance and well-being. So everything that we think about combines performance with well-being. One and the other, they work hand in hand, and they're both super important to create a good, inclusive, effective working environment. And then finally, human connection. We're really making strong relationships. We're managing, we're building those relationships. And this is where psychological safety weaves in. So that was also mentioned in some of the answers that we saw, but in terms of creating environments where people feel safe, they feel trusted, and they feel valued. So those are the 4 key pillars when we're talking about human leadership. That's what we mean. As I said, I think all of your answers really called out all of those. So it's super interesting, and it's great to know that we're on the right page in terms of what we're looking at. And as I said, we'll share some of those answers with you as well, so you can see what other people have been saying. But we're going to move on now. We're going to start to think about why is human leadership so important, and I'm going to hand back to Heather.
Thank you, Holly. So yeah, as Holly says, we've reflected on what human leadership is and isn't and what it means. So we're going to get stuck into now why human leadership is important. So if we could have the next slide, please. Internet's really taking its time today with these slides. Thank you very much. So when we talk about why is human leadership so important, the main thing that we want to look at is the impact of human leadership. So we're kind of focusing on 3 main areas of impact. So firstly, on people. Human leadership really brings for people less burnout, greater resilience, less absenteeism and lower staff turnover. And then when we look at the impact that that has on teams, we're looking at higher individual and team engagement, higher productivity. And for the organisation, we're looking at faster and more continuous learning, faster decision making, creative problem solving, and that leads to greater agility within the organisation. And when we think about when leaders are authentic, empathic and emotionally intelligent, it really builds on that theme that a few people touched on in the chat, and Holly mentioned as we were going through what human leadership is. Employees will feel psychologically safe to be themselves, and that all feeds into them experiencing greater well-being at work. And we know that when employees are happy, that is reflected in their performance, and that then will bring a good customer experience of working with the organisation. And also, you know, we need to focus on the fact that human leadership is also good for the leader as a human being. It's good for employees and it's good for customers all round. So if we can have the next slide, please. We'd really like to have a little talk about what challenges are you noticing that public sector leaders are facing. So if I could ask you again to use that chat box to enter in some of the themes that you're seeing at the moment. We can have a short discussion about that, if that sounds okay. Whilst we're waiting for those answers to come through, Holly, in your work with our clients in the public sector, have you noticed any main themes that are coming up recently?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, I think, personally, in terms of the work and the conversations I'm having. It's all focused around leadership, really. I think last year we were really talking about well-being, and well-being was the forefront agenda, and actually it's been a super interesting shift for everybody to be thinking about leadership and managers as well. So I guess the important thing for me here is really when we're saying leaders, it's actually leaders of all levels. So, you know, the senior exec level leaders, your senior leadership teams, but also some of those first time managers, those frontline managers and middle managers as well, in terms of actually, I think they've all got slightly different challenges perhaps. It'll be interesting to see what comes through on that chat feed to see if there is a difference depending on, you know, what type of leader you might be. But yeah, so it's a huge range. But we've got a slide on that coming up as well. So don't want to spoil it too soon.
That's it. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Thank you everyone for sending through some of your themes. Some of the things that are coming through are things around, you know, crisis after crisis. It just seems to be one thing after another at the moment. So really, that resilience and keeping you know, keeping people's well-being and positivity high. And there's a lot in there coming through around staff shortages, global disruption, motivation and burnout, and the kind of hybrid management of things, and ever increasing workloads with maybe you know, not so increasing staff numbers. So as we're moving through onto the next slide now, I'm going to hand back over to Holly to talk through some of the challenges that we have noticed with our clients. Thank you everyone for contributing, and as mentioned, if you can't see things coming through on the chat, we will be sharing after the session.
Fab, thank you. So yeah, as you can see on the screen, we've been having lots and lots of different conversations with public sector organisations. So, you know, this is across civil service, police forces, fire and rescue, NHS, lots of different challenges and lots of different contexts. But to try and summarise it, I guess these are some of the key things that we've heard in those conversations. So leading remote and hybrid teams, and we are seeing still some reluctance for people to come back into the office. What is the impact of that? Is there an impact? Should there be an impact? And how do leaders navigate and manage that? You know, being proactive and taking accountability for having difficult conversations, especially when virtual. Sometimes, you know, we've got to say some hard stuff. We've got to have difficult chats, particularly, you know, around performance, but also it could be around well-being. You know, if someone's going through a difficult time, how do you have a conversation with them about that that's sensitive but also effective, and how does the virtual nature of work get in the way of that? We've also got leading and navigating change. That's not going to be a surprise to anyone. You know, we've gone through a lot of change. COVID, the Great Resignation, or whatever you want to call it, that we're seeing, lots of different changes, and there will be more in future. You know, that's not the end of change, but how do we lead and navigate that? As people have said, we're tired of COVID, we're still sort of burnt out a little bit, and we're still going through further changes. So how do we lead that in the public sector? But then finally, and I actually think this is one of the most important points really, is that we've talked about how as leaders we can often be more focused on others than ourselves. And we sometimes just don't think about our own well-being and our own resilience because we're trying to look after other people's well-being. And it has been a difficult time, continues to be a difficult time, and lots of change. How do we maintain our own well-being and resilience and think about that as a leader? So this is really what we're hearing from our clients and our connections. And when we're thinking about human leadership and linking it back to that, really, it's not going to be a surprise that, you know, if we're more authentic as a leader, you know, that can help us with our well-being. If we're more inclusive, sort of having those difficult conversations and leading hybrid teams becomes a little bit easier. If we're role modeling, then that's a way to help us lead change and motivate and inspire people. And if we have great human connections and great relationships, you know, that can help with all of those challenges that sit above as well. So that's sort of what we're hearing from a challenge perspective. But if we go on to the next slide, what we've also got here is we've just reflected on what is our experience of training, of developing, of growing leaders within the public sector as well. So as I said, we've done a lot of different programs for leaders across civil service, NHS, police forces as well. And we were just sat and thought about what have we observed of leaders and managers going through our training, of our learning, what have we seen? So these are some of the things that we've seen. You know, when we think about well-being, we actually use the PERMA model of well-being. So 5 different pillars: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And we can see that within the leader population, that feeling of achievement can be lower when we compare it to other pillars like meaning or engagement. So how can we make sure that leaders feel like they're achieving things, especially, you know, if they're faced with lots of change and you know, staff and teams that are maybe a bit more demotivated. One of the other things we've also noticed is that leaders really relish that opportunity to take time out. So we know leaders and managers are super busy, they've got lots on their plate, but actually to have dedicated time to learn, to develop, to go on training courses, that's something that's really, really important to them, and they love that chance to sort of refocus on what matters to them and what matters to their teams as well. So that's another key observation of ours. We've already talked about relationships a lot as a leader and as a human leader. So again, it's probably not surprising that there has been a big focus that we're building and maintaining great relationships, and that's sort of a core pillar for us. And, you know, the last point, again, we've talked about in detail in terms of placing importance on others rather than ourselves, and that being a really, really big focus of ours. So really what this all says is that we know that there are a lot of different challenges that leaders are facing within the public sector and within the civil service. We know the importance of providing sort of that learning and development to them to support them in overcoming those challenges. So it's that opportunity to give them that learning opportunity and putting that human element at the core to help them navigate those changes effectively. So we're going to move on to the final part.
We are. So yeah, thank you, Holly. What we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about our programme, which is the Human Leadership Programme. So we've talked about what a human leader is, why it's important, and now we're going to just run you through our approach to upskilling leaders to be more human. So if I can have the next slide, please. Wonderful, thank you. So the aim of our programme is to encourage leaders to listen, guide and empower people as whole human beings. And we need to inspire and empower people to want to give their best rather than trying to get the best from them. So really using that strengths-based approach that we've spoken about. Our programme, as Holly's touched on a little bit already, does have 4 key modules. So those modules are authenticity, inclusion, role modelling and human connection, and each module of the programme comes with online on-demand learning, a facilitated skill development workshop to embed the learning, and then we also include within that one-to-one coaching sessions, strengths mastery sessions and the workbook and micro actions. This kind of mirrors our approach across all of our programmes of kind of the knowledge building, the strengths, and the kind of conversation-based approach that we take to things. The programme itself is, as I say, it's based on knowledge, skills and strengths, and we do take that blended learning approach. The nice thing about it is it does give you a bit of flexibility. So we do see with a lot of leaders, they are sometimes a little bit time poor. So you can access the content in your own time, along with the facilitated and collaborative sessions. And we also recommend that people do this programme in a cohort. That really does emphasise the importance of learning from each other and talking about our experiences to hear different perspectives. Seeing a question come through around what is the strengths mastery session. Holly, did you want to take that question? I think you might do it better justice than me.
Yeah, I could definitely take that question. It's a really, really good question. So when we're talking about strengths mastery, the purpose of this, as we've already mentioned, is everybody's got different strengths that we have to play to, things that energize us. So a strengths mastery session is it's separate to the skill development workshops, but it's another peer learning, peer coaching almost element where actually we're learning from each other, we're having conversations with each other. So the structure of that, I guess, is almost like an action learning set if you've used those previously, but it's very much about what challenge are we going through as a leader, and based on the learning that we've taken from online content or from the workshop that was facilitated, let's have a conversation as a peer group and let's coach each other through that challenge and find some new actions and think about what strengths we have that we can apply to that challenge to help us going forwards. So that's very much what we mean by strengths mastery. So we've learned some knowledge, we've thought about that skill development in the workshop. Now let's think about applying that to a particular challenge that we've got as a leader with our peer network and think about how we can use our strengths to overcome that.
Wonderful, thank you, Holly. You did that in a much more succinct way than I would have done. Thank you. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So we've spoken about kind of what the programme is and how the programme runs. And a lot of the time people ask us, who is the programme for? The answer to that is the programme does work for all managers and leaders within all organisations, no matter where they are in their career. So there might be managers who are about to be first-time managers, or they could be the most senior leaders within an organisation. And we kind of look at that in kind of different groups. So for executive leaders and board teams, we look at the impact that human leadership will have. So they may have completed some leadership development programs in the past, and our facilitation here is focused on emphasising and fine-tuning the impact of their leadership style on the human experience of others. And then we look at senior leadership teams. And with senior leadership teams, we look at uniting. So they are often the role models who are already great with teams, and we look at how they can provide a platform for uniting and collaborating across functions within the organisation. Next, we look at middle managers, and with middle managers, we look at translating. So they're often the translators within the organisation. They'll have multiple demands from senior leaders in their own teams. And for these leaders, they normally need the most support with resilience and confidence. And then we move on to kind of frontline and first-time managers, and for them we look at influencing. So they tend to be eager to learn and influence the organisation from the bottom up, so kind of that managing up piece. And then finally, we look at future leaders. And for future leaders, we focus on collaborating. So we're looking at encouraging future leaders of the business to collaborate with everyone in a more human and authentic way, and preparing them for leading human organisations of the future. It's important to note that with all of our programmes, we can contextualise them. And somebody's just asked a question about whether we can group manager levels together in training. I believe we can do that, but I think for maybe the most senior leaders and board teams, we'd look to maybe run that as a separate programme. But generally speaking, all of our programmes can be contextualised. We can make sure that we're talking within our programme about things that are important to your leaders and your organisation, and looking at specific challenges that they're facing. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that, actually, Holly.
No, I completely agree with everything you shared there. It's a very flexible approach, and it's what works for one organisation or one team or one group of leaders isn't necessarily the same for others. But what we do know is that core underlying basis of being a human leader and a human manager sits across all of that. So yeah, I think you did a great job.
Wonderful, thank you so much. If we can have the next slide, please. So on this slide, we're just sharing some snippets of feedback from people who have already been through our Human Leadership Online content. So you'll see there that one of the quotes is talking about looking at new insights into leadership development and how to lead during today's climate of uncertainty. We know from our work with the civil service that there is a big focus at the moment on the modern, innovative and skilled civil service, and looking at knowledge, skills and networks. All of our learning embeds and aligns with those key pillars. And to date, we've had just under 2,000 people enrol in the online course across 100 countries. So yeah, we've had a fair few people go through, and the feedback coming through is that it's been impactful. It's been giving people the opportunity to reflect on how they can encourage their team to connect. So some really lovely feedback there. I'm going to hand back over to Holly now, and I believe we're going to look at a couple of human leadership activities that we can take part in together now.
We are indeed, thank you. So as we're wrapping up today's webinar, today's session, we've got a few minutes left. So we thought we'd give just a little bit of insight in terms of human leadership, what we do for human leadership and what that looks like. So on the next slide, we've got a few questions on the screen. I'm actually going to launch a poll on the webinar, so hopefully you'll be able to see this. But in terms of our program, this is a little pulse check that we can do to see where we're at in terms of our human leadership levels. So you'll see there's 4 statements there, and it's probably fairly clear that the first one links to authenticity, the second one is inclusivity, the third one is role modeling, and the fourth one is those human connections. So it's really important to do a pulse check, to think about what are we already doing well and what do we want to focus on to develop, to grow, to help us achieve what we want to as a human leader. So I'm going to launch the first question as a poll, which hopefully you can see. And feel free to give it an answer, just see where you're at, reflect on that, how do you feel about that first statement in authenticity? I can also see a question that's popped in. The slides will be shared after this session along with the recording, and as we said, some of those chat comments as well in terms of what other people have been answering through the session. So we'll share all of that for your email afterwards, but just have a think about this poll. Where are you at in terms of authenticity? Can see some live responses coming through. Great question. Yes, 5 would be strongly agree. Probably should have specified that. So one being the lower end of the scale, 5 being the higher end of the scale. There's always one thing you miss when you're putting these slides together, but that's why we've got some great people on the session to point that out for us. I can see 4 here is coming out pretty strongly. So authenticity seems to be fairly strong in the group that we've got with us. But I'm going to go on to I'm going to close this poll now because I want to just go through the 4 different questions that we've got. So closing the authenticity poll and moving on to the second poll around inclusivity. Again, 1 is low, 5 is high. But how knowledgeable do you feel in ways to create inclusivity? So again, have a vote, have a self-reflect on where you feel like you're at on this particular poll. Seeing a few more varied responses here. 4 does still seem to be the strongest, but the span ranges the full scale from 1 to 5. So yeah, we're seeing a bit more variance here than we did in that first one. I see lots of votes coming through now.
It's lovely to see it coming through in real time, isn't it? Interesting how the polls are moving.
I know, and I'm such a stats nerd as well, so this is the kind of stuff I love.
It's wonderful.
Oh, 3 and 4 tying. I feel like we're in a race. I don't know who's going to win. I don't know if there one that I'm going to put my money on. I'm not sure. I'm going to close this poll now as well and move on to the third question that we've got. So this is about being a role model and managing our own behaviour. So again, I've launched the poll here. I am able to manage my own behaviour as a leader. So this is that role modelling piece. Again, where do you sit? 1 being low, 5 being high. Have a reflect. Of course, these statements, as a little pulse check, context can influence your answers to these, what you're going through both in work and in your personal life, and that's why doing a frequent or a regular pulse check, not every day, but just making sure that we come back to these to have a think and have a reflect.
It's really interesting with this one that it does seem to be scoring a little bit higher than the other two on the role modelling. Far more people feeling confident in the role modelling aspect. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, from my perspective, it's definitely sometimes easier to manage myself than manage other people, and know what other people are thinking is harder than knowing what I'm thinking. So maybe there's something in that as well, in terms of human leadership being about us and others, but sometimes us is a little bit easier if we've got that self-awareness.
For sure.
Okay, I'm going to close this one and just quickly launch the final one, just so that we've got through the whole poll. So the connection in my work relationships is meaningful. Again, 1 to 5, have a vote. How do you feel about your work relationships at the moment? Again, your context can influence this. It can change over time. If you're new to a team, that could impact it. If you've got lots of new people in your team, but you're a long-standing member, think about it. Why is this the case as well? These statements are here to prompt your thinking and prompt your reflection. So you can answer it and then think why. Why is that your answer? Why is that the case? And again, we're seeing a bit more variance in this question here around the relationships piece.
Far more even split on this one, isn't it? And I suppose, as you say, it's those external factors and the context of how people are at the time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for participating in the poll as well. It's love the engagement, love the enthusiasm, and hopefully given you some food for thought as well. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to close the poll now. But keep reflecting, keep thinking about your answers to those questions, and we will move on. We did have another question on the next slide, which unfortunately I think we've almost run out of time to fully answer, but you can see it on the screen there. So we were going to think about, let's put our understanding of human leadership into practice. So imagine you've got a new starter in your team who's finding it difficult to fit in. How would you respond and it probably should say as a human manager or a human leader? So based on your knowledge that we've discussed today and what you think and perceive human leadership to be, what would you do in that situation? How would you help that new starter? Feel free to pop your answers again in the question box, thinking about authenticity, inclusivity, role modeling, human connections. How do they all play out in this particular scenario? So again, it's all about applying our learning to current context, situations, and actually embedding that. And just as you have a think about that one as we wrap up, again, just emphasizing the importance when we're thinking about human leadership and developing and growing human leadership, particularly, through a BNF approach, the importance of using discussions like this to learn from other managers and other leaders is so critical, because we all have different experiences and we can learn from each other, as well as learning from, expert facilitators and psychologists and subject matter experts. Actually, as leaders and managers, let's learn from each other, and that's the key message that we want here. And I can see some of the answers coming through. So talk to them, share your own story as well. So if you've had struggles, that authenticity piece, that vulnerability piece, listen to them and then share your own perspectives and your own experiences, so they don't feel like they're alone. Again, that listening piece coming through, offering advice, considering a plan of action. all of those different pieces are really, really important when we're being human and helping people to settle in. Suggest a coffee. Love that. Simple yet effective. I would always be down for a coffee if anyone asked.
I absolutely love the virtual open door policy comment that's come through. And using video when speaking can be really important for that building trust as well. Some really lovely themes coming through there.
Absolutely. And let's move on to the final slide. I'm afraid we are out of time. We had so much to talk about and so much to discuss, but thank you all for engaging with that one.
Yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining us today. I hope the information was useful, and as we mentioned, we are available on email if you have any follow-up questions. We've also included a little QR code there for our LinkedIn page. We regularly post our B&F Bites. They're short videos covering some of the topics and themes you'll find in our programmes. And every Monday morning at 8:30 we do go live and have a conversation around various different themes that our clients are facing within the civil service, public sector, and also within the private sector. If anybody did have any final questions or reflections, please do feel free to pop them into the chat or just to email myself or Holly. And just again to reiterate, we will be sending around the recording after the session and key slides. Please do feel free to share them with anyone you think might be interested. We're really hoping this will be a conversation starter for a lot of people. And yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. Holly, thank you.
Thank you. No, it's been great. Been great to have you all. And yeah, hopefully we'll be chatting to some more of you soon.